The first thing Archivist Ves Cawthon noticed about the report was the timestamp. It had been logged 4 hours ago, and it had already been flagged twice for deletion. That never happened. Not with a Class 1 restricted zone breach. She pulled the file anyway because someone had to, and because the automated deletion request had come from a department that officially did not exist anymore. The header read, Unauthorized entry. Hollow Reach Quarantine Field. No permit on record. Species of intruder, human. Ves sat back in her chair. Her 4 eyes blinked in sequence. A nervous habit she'd never quite trained out of herself. She had heard the rumors before. Everyone in the registry had. But rumors were not supposed to end up in her inbox with a case number attached. To understand why this mattered, you have to understand what the Hollow Reach actually was. It was not a planet. It was not a station. It was a wound in space, roughly the size of a moon, where an ancient precursor civilization had once tried to build something they should not have built. Nobody knew what it was supposed to do. The precursors were long gone, and they had not left instructions. What they had left behind was a defense grid so old and so thorough that in 11,000 years, nothing organic had ever gotten past it alive. Nothing. Not one scout. Not one drone with a pilot inside it. Not one desperate smuggler looking for ancient tech to sell. The grid did not negotiate. It did not warn. It simply erased. And according to the file open on Ves's desk, a human named Dale Whitfield had walked in through the front of it 3 days ago, whistling. Ves requested the surveillance footage before she requested anything else. This was, she would later admit, a mistake, because once she watched it, she could not stop thinking about it. The footage came from an old Caliph monitoring buoy, half dead, still limping along on backup power at the edge of the reach. It showed a single human in a scuffed environment suit, walking toward the shimmering boundary of the defense field like it was a puddle he intended to step over. Behind him, his shuttle sat parked on a patch of gray rock, its engine still ticking as it cooled. There was no way he did not see the warning beacons. They were the size of small moons, blinking bright crimson, broadcasting on every frequency known to civilized space. He walked past the first one without slowing down. Ves had been an archivist for 62 years. She had cataloged a great many strange things. She had never cataloged this. The defense grid's outer layer activated exactly as designed. Sensors swept the intruder. Analysis began. Somewhere in that ancient patient-machine intelligence, a decision was being made about whether this new thing was a threat. The readout, translated from old precursor script by the buoy's onboard system, flashed across the bottom of the footage.
Signature, unresolved.
Threat class, null. Action, none. The human kept walking. Here is the part that Ves had to watch 4 times before she believed it. The grid did not fire. It did not seal. It did not do anything at all. It was not that it chose to let him through. It was that, as far as the machine could tell, there was nothing there to let through. The human registered on its instruments the way a stray photon registers, or a wisp of interstellar dust. Present technically, meaningless functionally. He walked through 11,000 years of flawless, merciless defense like it was fog. Ves closed the file and sat very still for a long moment. Then she did what any good archivist does when she finds something that does not make sense. She went looking for precedent. She found the first one almost immediately, buried 9 layers deep in a records vault that had not been properly indexed since the Second Concord. HFY Precinct. A quarantine zone sealed 4 centuries ago after a bioweapon experiment went wrong and turned an entire moon's ecosystem into something that ate anything with a nervous system. No species had set foot there since. The precinct's automated wardens killed anything that crossed the boundary within, on average, 6.2 seconds. 211 years ago, a human survey team had crash-landed nearby after an engine failure. They had walked straight through the precinct's boundary looking for spare parts. They had walked back out 4 days later carrying a solved engine problem and, according to the incident log, a slightly annoying moss. The wardens had recorded their presence. They had not classified it as anything worth acting on. Ves found the second case an hour later, and the third, 20 minutes after that. And by the time she stopped counting, She had lost track somewhere past 40. A derelict Verlaxian dreadnought, still armed, still hostile, still guarding a treasury no one had opened in 3,000 years. A human salvage crew had opened it in an afternoon. They left a thank you note. A black hole observation post built by a species so paranoid about information leaks that they had wired the entire station to detonate if any unauthorized mind so much as thought about entering. For humans had toured the place for 2 days, taken photographs, and left a jar of homemade jam as a gift for whoever found it next. The Null Choir's ancestral meditation vault, a telepathic hive species so sensitive that even the presence of another hive mind at the boundary caused catastrophic feedback loops in their collective consciousness, had been closed to every species in the galaxy for this reason. A single human tourist had wandered in by accident while looking for a bathroom. The choir reported, with what Vess could only describe as deep and lasting confusion, that they had felt absolutely nothing. By the time she had read through the 40th case, Vess understood one thing clearly. This was not luck. This was not a series of unrelated flukes across 4 centuries and a dozen unrelated civilizations. This was a pattern, and patterns, in her line of work, meant something real was hiding underneath them. She needed to know what. She brought her findings to Director Awesome the next morning, expecting to be told she was overreacting. Awesome did not tell her that. Awesome went very quiet, the way people do when they are deciding how much truth to share. "You've stumbled into an old committee problem," he said finally. "One we've been sitting on for a while." "What committee problem?" "The one about what a human actually is." Vess did not understand, so Awesome explained, and what he explained took the rest of the morning and most of her certainty about how the universe worked. Every restricted zone in known space, he told her, was built by someone. And every automated defense system those someone's left behind was built to recognize something specific. Threat. But threat to a machine intelligence built by a hive species or a telepathic species, or a species with a shared digital consciousness, does not mean a dangerous individual creature. It means a signature, pattern, a recognizable shape in the way a mind or a civilization organizes itself. Hive species broadcast a resonance. Telepathic species broadcast a field. Digital collectives broadcast a network signature so distinct you could identify their species from light years away just from the shape of their thought. Every single warning system in the galaxy had been built, consciously or not, to detect that shape. And humans don't have one, Vess said slowly. Humans, Awesome said, are the single most cognitively disorganized species we have ever catalogued. No shared resonance. No collective field. No consistent internal architecture from one individual to the next. Every human brain runs its own chaotic, contradictory, entirely private show, and none of it synchronizes with anything else in any way a sensor was ever built to detect. So the systems don't see them as a threat. The systems, Awesome said, don't see them as anything. To a precursor threat matrix built around detecting coordinated minds, one human wandering through alone registers the same as a rock rolling downhill. Meaningless motion. Background noise. Vess sat with that for a long moment. "That's terrifying," she said. "It's worse than terrifying," Awesome said. "It's inconvenient. Because it means every restricted zone in the galaxy, every quarantine, every vault, every graveyard of the dead, is only restricted for the rest of us." There was a silence in the room that Vess did not enjoy. "Why hasn't this been fixed?" she asked. "Surely someone has proposed updating the defense grids, recalibrating them to detect individual threat regardless of resonance signature." Awesome's laugh had no humor in it. 17 proposals, he said. In 400 years. Every single one has failed. Why? Because to recalibrate the systems, the engineering committees first need a stable, agreed-upon definition of what a human threat profile actually looks like. And humans do not have one. Their aggression, their curiosity, their capacity for violence, their capacity for mercy, all of it varies so wildly from individual to individual that you cannot build a model. Every attempt collapses under its own contradictions within the first 6 months. Vess thought about Dale Whitfield walking past a warning beacon the size of a moon, whistling. So the loophole stays. The loophole, Awesome said, has been open for 400 years, and every serious attempt to close it has been quietly buried by committees who realized, halfway through, that closing it would also mean admitting none of us actually understand what we're dealing with. Vess went back to her desk that afternoon and pulled up the footage of Dale Whitfield one more time. She watched him step past the boundary. She watched the readout flicker. Signature unresolved. Threat class null. Action none. She watched him vanish into the hollow reach's ancient corridors. Alone, unarmed as far as her instruments could tell, walking into a structure that had killed everything that had ever tried to enter it. Then she pulled up the follow-up report, filed 40 hours later. Whitfield had emerged. He had emerged carrying 3 pieces of precursor technology no one had ever successfully retrieved, a data core that turned out to contain the complete original schematics for the defense grid itself, and, inexplicably, a rock. His stated reason for entering the Reach, according to his own recorded log, was that his shuttle's long-range scanner had detected something interesting-looking and he'd had, in his words, a few hours to kill before the next jump window. He had not known it was restricted. There had been no permit request because there had been no awareness that a permit was required. He had simply seen something interesting and gone to look at it. Vess sat with that thought for a long time. There was something almost unbearable about it. 11,000 years of perfect, merciless defense, built by a civilization so advanced it could engineer weapons that erased matter down to the subatomic level, and all of it had been rendered irrelevant by a species that could not organize its own minds well enough to register as a threat. Not because humans were secretly stronger, not because they had some hidden technological edge, but because the very thing that made humans hard to live with, their contradictions, their individuality, their sheer refusal to synchronize into anything predictable, was the same thing that made them functionally invisible to every threat detection system built by every other species in the galaxy. They weren't beating the security. They were failing to trip it by simply being too disorganized to qualify as a coordinated presence at all. She brought this conclusion to Asim the next day, expecting him to correct her. He didn't. "You've got it," he said. Mostly. There's one more piece. The part that actually keeps the committee up at night." Vess braced herself. "Go on." "It's not just that the old systems fail to detect them," Asim said. "It's that humans, on some level, seem to have figured this out. Not consciously, not as policy, but somewhere in the collective folklore of that species, there's an instinct that restricted zones are, functionally, empty rooms with impressive signage." "You're saying they know?" "I'm saying," Asim said, "that in 400 years of documented incidents, not one human has ever expressed genuine surprise at walking through a supposedly impenetrable boundary unharmed. They act like it's expected. Like the sign was more of a suggestion than a wall." Vess thought about that for the rest of the day, and it followed her home, and it was still sitting in the back of her mind when she went to bed. The next morning, she requested access to something she had never had reason to look at before, the human species' own internal cultural archive, the parts of it that had been shared freely with the wider galactic community as goodwill exchanges. She was looking for an explanation, a reason, some ancient trauma or hard-won lesson that had taught the species not to fear boundaries the way everyone else did. She found something else instead. She found stories, thousands of them spanning centuries in every language humans had ever spoken, about people who walked past warnings, ignored locked doors, entered forbidden places, and came out the other side changed, but alive. Not because the stories taught caution, because again and again, across an entire species' recorded history, the moral of the tale kept landing on the same idea, phrased 1,000 different ways. The scariest room is the one nobody has bothered to check. Vess closed the file, and for the first time since she'd opened Dale Whitfield's case, she felt something other than confusion. She felt something closer to respect, tangled up with something closer to dread. Because it meant the loophole wasn't an accident of biology alone. It was reinforced generation after generation by a culture that had decided, collectively and without ever holding a formal vote on it, that a locked door was information, not an obstacle. The committee meeting was scheduled for the following week, and Vess was asked to present her findings. She stood in front of 11 representatives from 11 different species, each with their own resonance signature, their own collective architecture, their own perfectly rational fear of the unknown, and she told them what she had found. She told them about the Hollow Reach and HFY Precinct and the Dreadnought and the Observatory and the Null Choir's Vault, and the 40-some other cases stretching back 4 centuries. She told them about the signature and the null classification, and the 17 failed proposals to fix it. And then she told them the part that mattered most. "We cannot patch this," she said. "Not because the engineering is too difficult. Because the flaw isn't in our systems. It's in our assumption that a threat has to look like something coordinated in order to matter. Humans have shown us, for hundreds separate times, that the most effective way through any of our defenses is simply not to have the kind of mind our defenses were built to notice." There was a long silence in the chamber. Finally, one of the representatives, a Threll elder with a voice like grinding stone, asked the question Vess had known was coming. "So what do you propose we do?" Vess had thought about this for a long time before the meeting, and she had come to an answer she did not love, but could not argue with. "Nothing," she said. "We do nothing. We cannot build a defense against a species that doesn't register as an intrusion in the first place. Every attempt to do so will require us to define them, and they resist definition the way water resists being nailed to a wall. Our best option is not to close the loophole. It's to make peace with the fact that it will never close, and start asking them nicely before they walk into places we'd rather they didn't." The Threll elder considered this for a long moment. "And if they say no?" Vess thought about Dale Whitfield whistling, walking past a beacon the size of a moon. "Then they say no," she said. "And they go in anyway, and they come back out, usually with something interesting in their pocket, and we write another report explaining why our 11,000-year-old defense grid did not consider them worth stopping." 3 months later, Vess was assigned to draft the registry's new official policy on restricted zone access. A policy that, after 400 years of failed engineering solutions, finally acknowledged the problem in plain administrative language. The final clause, the one she wrote herself, read simply, "Entry by any species recognized under the Concord's threat detection framework requires written permit, verified escort, and formal review. Entry by humans is, for reasons the registry has extensively documented and been unable to resolve, effectively unregulable, and permission is therefore considered a courtesy rather than a requirement. The registry strongly encourages requesting it anyway." Vess never did learn what Dale Whitfield had done with the rock. She thought about tracking him down and asking. She had the coordinates. She had the permit request paperwork, filed 3 days after his exit from the Hollow Reach, a full week late, and addressed, with what she could only assume was cheerful sincerity. "To whoever's in charge of that place, sorry I didn't ask first, it looked interesting, thanks for not blowing me up." In the end, she decided not to. Some mysteries, she had come to believe, were better left as they were. She kept one thing from the case, though. A single line, pulled from Whitfield's own recorded log, spoken to no one in particular as he'd stepped past the last warning beacon and into 11,000 years of silence. "Locked doors," he'd said, "are just rooms that haven't met the right person yet." Vess had it printed and mounted above her desk, where it stayed for the rest of her career, a small and permanent reminder that the galaxy's oldest, deadliest, most perfect defenses had never once been designed with humans in mind, because no one who built them had ever imagined a species capable of being so thoroughly, catastrophically beside the point. And somewhere out past the edge of charted space, a locked door was waiting. It just didn't know yet that it wasn't going to stay locked for long. The end.